Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond. Be sure to hit like and subscribe so everybody else can find the channel. Today we're joined by Berkey Brown. Berkey, welcome.
Hey, Ben, what's up, man? Happy Monday. Glad to be here.
Happy Monday to you as well. Well, in this Roadmaps to Resilience, I came across this great book called The Way of Zen, and it's really apropos for this time we're in. If we think about the stress and the uncertainty, and certainly with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what's going now on in Washington, and some of the commentary, you don't think 2020 could get any worse? Well, just buckle up and hang on, because I think the next quarter, next 3 months is going to be historical for sure. And so in this book, The Ways of Zen, it's the ultimate guide to understanding the history, principles, and benefits of Zen and how it can help us experience, get this, mental stillness and enjoy life, even in uncertain times. And who doesn't want to enjoy life right now, right?
Right. It's tough, man. It's definitely tough. You have to have a certain perspective, because if you take on this perspective of where the world is at or where the world wants you to look at, then Zen is an impossibility.
Yeah. And so Alan Watts came up with a great quote, and he said, "And there is never anything but the present. And if one cannot live there, one cannot live anywhere." And I think a lot of people are either in the past or in the future, because the present is kind of an explosion. So I would say at one time or another in the past, most people probably have come across the word Zen, and it's sort of Eastern and mystical. And we live in this Judeo-Christian, for the most part, country. So most people, when they were raised here, weren't really steeped in this concept, right? And it may be been while referring to a particular peaceful feeling, room you're in, if you will, Zen, or possibly you heard a coworker explaining how they were going to relax over the weekend to get the Zen back, right? So I think, again, for Western nations, it's just not a typical concept that they've really delved deep into and really gone deep into. But this book really talks on 3 lessons. And then as I see each lesson, Burke, I'd like to get your reaction. The first one is, our minds create illusions about reality, but Zen helps us to see things accurately. And that's so true. Sometimes we project, we have a situation, and then we extrapolate what that situation is going to be. And of course, we extrapolate and project the worst possible outcome, right? So again, the illusion of the mind.
Right. Absolutely, man. They say that, Zen really is this space of mind without mind, which is an interesting thing, because, how can you say mind without mind? But ultimately the mind is a producer, right? And it's also what it is without the production. So if you look at what it produces, it's thoughts. And when you produce thoughts, you create meaning. The thought itself creates meaning. Sentences, subjects, direct objects. All of a sudden, you're using symbols. If I say, "Hi, I'm Berkey," I'm not is exactly just my name. There's so much more that's to me. But what we do is condense, we categorize, we predict, we judge, we create schemas. But when you remove the mind creations of thoughts, then you just have the mind. And so the goal is, how do you get so present that you don't place a projection upon what you're looking at? Right? If you just say it is what it is, then all you do is accept. And when you accept, then you can move within that space, within the bracket of the presence, right? But when you are stuck in your past, thinking about what happened before or what could happen in the future, all of a sudden you're siphoning from these illusions, one being a ghost and one being this total non-reality, and pouring it into the present moment. And then your mind is filled with things that aren't real. That's where you lose Zen. That's when you create stories. That's when you create symbols. That's when you create meaning at a higher level than what just is. And that's where the most peace is, where you're just saying it is what it is. What I can control, I can. What I cannot control, I can't. What I can control, though, is my focus. And I want to be here.
Yeah, that's really good. And again, I like that the first lesson, Zen allows you to see things clearly, or see clearly the illusions that are in your mind, or that your mind creates. And as I read more about this book, everybody wants to be happy. And the question is, if you were happy, what would it look like if you were there, right? And what would you do if you got happiness? And I think what's interesting about this book is they would say that when you think about happiness, it's not the absence of pain, right? So if you're like laying in the bed, and you move from one side to the other, because on one side you're feeling the pain. So what do? You move to the other. And it's kind of a paradox, right? Where you can only feel the comfort of switching sides because you knew the discomfort of being on one side too long. So in other words, pain isn't avoidable. And it's just also just another aspect of pleasure. So I think the idea that this book was sort of bringing out is, with Zen, it's not just always the pleasure principle, but there is pain that sort of adds to the pleasure, because you have the contrast and the relativity.
Right. Absolutely. I always relate it to this. Like there's two types of pleasure. There's from neutral to a pleasing sensation, or from pain to the reduction. And the perfect example is like, let's say you have to go to the bathroom really bad and you're stuck on the 405, right? All of a sudden you have this extreme amount of pain, and just the release of that pain is pleasure, right? And so it's kind of understanding that you do need the yin and yang. You need the contrast. The contrast is what determines, like, I love the stars and the moon because of the background that shows them, that kind of pushes them forward. The beauty of them can only be defined by the absence of them behind them, right? In the same way, I can't appreciate the star and the moon when all of a sudden the sun is up at noonday, right? So it's kind of understanding that there's this process of, you need the yang for the yin. You need the darkness for the light. You need to understand that you can't be happiness without the existence and potential for sadness. And this ability to kind of dance between those and understand that process of moving through life, trying to find the experiences that give you that pleasure. Gratitude can be one of them. In order for me to be grateful for something, I have to realize that it could not be mine, right? I have to realize that the things that I do have, I could not have, therefore I would have gratitude. And so it's understanding that a part of the entire kind of natural laws of the universe is that for me to have what I would more call joy is to understand all the potential realities that are happening in the world and choosing to focus on the ones that lift my spirits, that put me in a space of peace, that keep me aligned. Because at the same time, if you look at my natural body, if I even eat that food, it does the best it can to create health and life within me. Well, why don't I do the same thing with the way that I think? If I have a bad experience, how do I transform those nutrients in some way, shape, or form to create health and life within me? That's what creates happiness. That's a certain type of Zen thinking that's required to enjoy life versus just be kind of a ricochet off, oh, good, bad, good. And your emotions follow that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We go, not only do we have to control our appetites for what we bring in our bodies, but certainly in our minds, and really be guardians of the gate, because there's a lot of crap out there, quite frankly. And so Zen also
Right.
teaches that you can't be a victim of circumstances, right? But you're part of them, right? Just like in the same way on a hot summer day, you don't sweat from the heat. Your sweat is the heat, right? So you're not a victim of your circumstances. You're just part of them.
I love that, man. There's when I talk to my clients about meditation, or I tell them, like, one of my clients went to Alaska, and I was telling him, while you're out there, you're going to want to take pictures. And what happens is when you pull up and you take a picture, all of a sudden what you're doing is you're the observer, right? And when you become the observer, you become one who's looking at the art. But if you really center, you'll realize that there's almost this like higher observer that's looking at, it's like when you look at an ant just kind of minding its business as it travels through the cement. But when you become a part of the picture, when you become ingrained, I remember I was in Spain, I was in Madrid, and we were at this mountain, this castle in the mountain, and we were on the mountain, and I was looking at it, I'm like, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. My mind kept projecting, oh, hey, you're in Spain. This is beautiful. But then I meditated. And I closed my eyes, no more than 5 minutes, just breathing in, breathing out, and centering myself. When I opened my eyes, the colors were so much more vibrant. All of a sudden, I realized where I was and that I was a part of it. That after I'm gone, after I am just dust again, these mountains still remain. And so what happens is you start to understand that you are a part of the flow. Just like you said, it's not the sweat is because of the heat. It is heat. It's a response to heat. It's a part of the entire ecosystem of life. And the more that we can get out of our egocentricity, then we start to understand that we're a part of the magic. And when we understand that we're a part of the magic, then it allows us to get into that space of flow, to where you understand that just as the tree, blossoms, grows, and dies, we blossom, grow, and die. And if you're okay with that, if you accept it, then you can really absorb the moment versus constantly thinking about the next thing or trying to capture the moment and take a picture of it.
Yeah, and the illusions of the mind are powerful, right? We
Right.
imagine a lot of things that are just not real. And so another way to understand it is to look at the connection between the mind and the body. You don't get into certain circumstances. They only exist because your mind and body are there to observe them. So when we think about what's reality, absent the mind and body, what is reality, right? So it's an illusion at some level, and it's the ability to stop and observe what you're seeing and not judging it, just being there, observing it and seeing what it is, right?
You know what? Yeah, it's we can go full Zen, and then when you're full Zen, you're like, okay, I need to come back to earth, right? So there's you have to dance back and forth between it. But we talk about the mind body connection and that dichotomy. It's not real, right? There is not a real, it's not that they're a connection. It's all one thing. If I say, this is my hand, that's just the title that we give this thing that's connected to this, that's branched out from this other branch that comes to this trunk, right? And so we have all the names and titles so that we can understand it, so that we can make sense. But at the end of the day, it's one thing. There is no distinction. There is no separation. And I think that when we understand that the mind and body has no distinction and has no separation, when I can allow my intuition to go not just in my mind, but also in my gut, when I can let my emotions alert me and guide me, but not control my actions. When these two work in tandem, when they come together and understand that there's this kind of flow between them, all of a sudden I exist kind of almost at a higher plane. It's easier for me to maneuver through the world. It's easier for me to engage because I'm not married to the story of how life should be. I'm not married to the story of how my body must be. It's just, you just start to flow. And I think ultimately that's the place that I want to be. Because obviously there's times when I'm like, okay, I need to use my brain for this work right here. Okay, I need to listen to my heart when I make this choice. But at the kind of more constant spaces throughout the day, I want to be able to kind of easily flow between mind, body, and just allow myself to exist. And that's where I think a lot of the power comes from. It's connecting, it's erasing the dichotomies to realize that I am just one thing. And if I don't categorize, then I can really be present to what I'm feeling and thinking all throughout myself.
Yeah, looking at the way of Zen, we think about flow, and you say, well, if you don't just be, you just don't flow. What's the alternative? Well, we see it daily, right? We see self-medication with food or drugs or
Right.
alcohol or sex or money or power, and these are sort of constructs that are trying to be like that salmon swimming upstream for that elusive goal that sort of almost needs sort of a force that pushes against us, right? And there's some arguments you can make with coal going to a diamond, that pressure is not a bad thing. Or when you're flying a plane, there's some pressure exerted upon you to get better, to get cleared or whatever. But in life in general, I would say flow state's pretty important, because absent flow, you see a lot of people pushing against what's natural, right? Against what nature provides. And
Right.
they can't deal with it. They can't cope with it. So the second lesson in the way of Zen is the art of Zen requires naturalness and spontaneity. Now, if you think about the ancient philosophy, it's not about becoming something specific, right? In other words, it's all about letting yourself be aimless. Now, to the Western mind, that's nuts, right? Because it's
Right.
always
Right.
goals. It's always a plan of attack. It's like, here's the goals. I want to go to college, maybe graduate, maybe
Right.
PhD, and do whatever, right? And so I think for the Western mind, it's really hard to get their brain around the idea of just being in a Zen place where it's spontaneous and there's no real direction. It's aimless. And I think when you think about emotions that everybody's going through in this period of time, emotions are the same way too. Whatever you're feeling after an event is natural and thus valuable. So you don't judge the emotion. You kind of go with the flow of the emotion. Now that assumes you're not the arbiter and
Right.
the creator of your misery. I'm not saying you go rob a bank, beat somebody up, do something extreme, and then you have emotions from that.
Right. Right.
Marinate in that. I'm talking about maybe things that happen to you or things you observe, or things that you've experienced, maybe a loss of a loved one, that those experiences and emotions can be very useful for the future as you develop through that experience.
Right. Right. Yeah. I love what you're saying, because, it's back to the yin and yang. There's the kind of Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy. We'll create those dichotomies for now. But it's specialize. It's follow this map, your goals, make sure they're smart goals, execute. The metric is success, financial success. The metric is popularity. So all of a sudden we create these certain metrics. And so we live our lives that way. What my concern is, there's nothing wrong with that, but for those things to equate to happiness is where it becomes dangerous, right? If I have to do this in order to be happy, because a lot of people find themselves achieving those things and feeling miserable afterwards. And I've had a lot of clients that have been there, that have gone up the corporate ladder, that have gone to the incredible schools, that have had, the perfect wives or husband, but they're not happy because they haven't done any core work themselves. They haven't figured out who they are. They chase somebody else's story, climb somebody else's ladder. That's a dangerous thing. And at the same time, we don't want it to be where you're just out there being completely spontaneous and you have no responsibilities. And it's very hard, especially in the world that we live in today. It may be easier maybe a couple thousand years ago, but in the world that we lived in today, if you kind of want to eat, unless you want to like live, off the grid, there's certain things that are required. You need to have a modicum of organization and discipline, right? So it's finding that balance through it that really is important. But what I say is if somebody is too much on this side, I say, come to this side. If somebody is too much on this side, I say, come to this side. And what happens is the pendulum finds itself in the center. And, you know, what I say for people that are so focused on logic and rationality and achieving, I say, you know, the best way to understand Zen or peace or flow is to go dance. Like when I get to a dance party, I'm not going to say, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a shuffle over here. I'm going to do a two-step that way. I'm going to do a slide, and then I'll be right over there. Like nobody does that. What happens is the beat hits, I move. My body has this impetus to act or do whatever it wants to do in feeling in conjunction with the music. There is no goal in dancing. Right? When I create music, there's no goal of I can't wait to finish this. When I hop on a roller coaster, I'm not like I can't wait till it's done. It's I want to enjoy the thrill of the experience. That's presence. That's powerful. That's beautiful. And that's what we want people to get to. We want them to have that type of presence. And so that's how you say it on this type. But when you have other people who are more kind of, you know, free-minded, you start to teach them about goals. You teach them about how setting a vision is important, because when you set a vision, it tells you that there's a distance, your current reality and your distance between the vision. And then what you want to do is you want to create some type of tension that pulls them to make choices, organized choices to achieve the vision. So depending on where you are, the goal is always to meet in the middle. And hopefully in the middle, you find out what you really care about. Because once you know what you care about, then you know how to work and you know how to flow. Then you find freedom, because then you can just oscillate back and forth. They may seem like a dichotomy, but it's just this, even in my research, what I called it was the sweet spot between the ability to flow and the ability to work, the ability to flow and work. Here's the pleasure of flow. Here's the discipline of your values, the character that comes with you. You put those together, you can create an incredible life. Just the truth.
Yeah, you know, I think unfortunately most people are out of balance, in at least Western world, Western culture, right? It's this push towards accumulation, you know,
Right.
wealth, whatever, materialism, and I think there's a big struggle. And as I was read further in this book, one Zen monk began to cry, and one of the students said, "Someone of your stature shouldn't be crying." And the monk's response was that weeping, he was weeping because he wanted to. And it taught us a lot about the importance of letting ourselves feel. And I think a lot of people, when you think about self-medication on any number of levels, are trying to turn the feeling centers off and sort of like program robots. They've done a lot of stuff. They've been through a lot of stuff. And they're just like sometimes too mission focused, right? To the detriment of your family, to your relationships, to a lot of things. And so the idea of Zen is letting yourself feel the natural flow of energy coming from you and letting yourself express it, right? Because if you don't express it and you repress it, that's where you get ulcers. That's where you get all kinds of problems within your internal body.
Yeah. You know, it really is true, man. I think that there's a, one of my friends, this is sad. His good friend passed away just in his sleep, just this last week. And it was, really difficult. And he's a strong guy, but you know, one of the things that I mentioned to him is, you know, you're like me, there's a sense of rationality, and you have a lot of movement and a lot of things that happens. We stay busy. But I told him that it'd be good for him to set aside some time to mourn. And I remember I've done that. I remember when I was at Cal, there was a period where I just was feeling a lot of energy, and I knew that there was an emotion that was somewhere. And I had two options. One is to completely suppress it, right? And have it come out in who knows what type of ways that we subconsciously wouldn't even understand, or set aside a time to mourn. And so I remember I was like, okay, Saturday at 3:00, I'm going to set some time to mourn. And that just sounds so like, why would you, is it even possible? It's more so the willingness to create space for that. If nothing happens, that's fine. But what I'm telling myself internally is that you are worthy of voicing yourself. You are worthy of feeling. And so when I went to that time, literally, I would say anything in me that I am unconsciously suppressing, that I'm holding within me, you are allowed to come out. I will not judge you. I will not try to stop you. You're free to do whatever you want. And then you just kind of just sit there and you feel it. And then all of a sudden you start thinking of people that you love, or this stuff starts to happen, and then you release. And I think what happens is people are so afraid of getting there because they think that sadness, that tears equals something was done wrong. It means that I'm not happy, which is not good. But we go back to the roller coaster. We're freaked out on the fall, but the fall gives us the momentum for the spin, and the spin is the fun. If we take this separation of the fall and the fun spin. If we separate them, then it's like bad, good, fun, worrisome. But if you just call it a roller coaster or call it life, then all of a sudden you're not avoiding any piece of it. That's where you become empowered, because you're no longer have a narrative of good or bad, up or down, upside down or up or right side up. All of a sudden you're like, this is life. And if it's time for me to weep, then I weep. If there's a time for me to gather stones, I gather, spread. You know, I think that's in Ecclesiastes. There's a time for everything under the sun. And I think understanding that there's a time for everything means you don't need to avoid everything. All of a sudden you can exist and be okay with your emotions and experiences.
Right. Yeah, I think in this Western culture too, I was thinking the other day that sometimes we want to project a certain image. We want to project a certain strength that isn't there. We want to project a certain persona that just isn't there. And the idea of just being comfortable with who you are and where you're at in your development. I would argue that anybody in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, if they could experience themselves in their 70s and think the way a 70 or 60-year-old thinks right now, they would look at what they do and how they approach it as folly. Because really, it's not about being a master at the moment. It's about getting there. It's about building to that point and really just being comfortable in your own skin. What does that translate into? Authenticity. Because there's a lot of people that walk around sort of putting on a mask and putting on a front, and they're never real. We were yesterday at a car dealership. It was interesting. This guy came up. I won't talk about the dealership, and I won't go there again because there wasn't authenticity. There wasn't integrity. There was a typical salesman approach that I experienced. And the gentleman wasn't aware enough of how he was showing up. Why did he show up that way? He has a gun to his head to hit certain numbers. So they try certain tactics.
Right.
What it does is you end up walking away with a really bad taste in your mouth, never to go back there again. Again, I wouldn't mention the dealership. I wish them all the success. But man, we walk around with certain, masks on and certain agendas versus just authenticity and listening to the customer, what they really want. If he had done that, he may have gotten a sale. But he didn't do that. Right. So we ended up going somewhere else. So it is fascinating where, depending on your age in this culture, it's all about projection. It's all about image. It's all about the 8.5 by 11 glossy. And boy, a lot of energy gets put into that notion. So much so that people will go to, look at, I don't know if you've ever seen that show. Anyways, people get cosmetic surgery. They're out of Beverly Hills and they're two doctors.
Was it?
You know what I'm talking about?
Botched or nip and tuck.
Yeah, nip and tuck. Yeah. And you see these people coming in, you say, well, you look fine, but they want to just triple down on the idea of what they think beauty is or acceptance or whatever. And to me, it's a metaphor. That's a physical manifestation. That's an outward appearance. But then there's also the mind part of that, right?
Right.
People that apply the same approach to the mind and other things in their life. Like I have to have a certain car or a certain house or whatever.
Right.
And when they get to a certain point, they're not happy. And so I think there's the opportunity about being mindful and the way of Zen and saying what really, really matters. And it's so hard to do in this Western world. I remember listening to Tony Robbins one time talk about Fiji, and he has a place on Fiji where he's brought people as part of his conferences. And he says, some of the happiest people I've ever met on this planet Earth are in Fiji, and they have absolutely nothing, right? Mm-hmm. So you look at the balance and you say, what is it? And certainly in America, there's, and Western culture, there's harmful manifestation. I mean, look what's going on in America today. And if you put any of these people in a really impoverished country with no rights, how would that change people? I mean, in America, you can, it's easy to be a peacock and demand a lot of things because we're a very wealthy nation. We'll go to another country where you have none of that. How would that change? It's not a statement to say change. It's like, how would that impact somebody if you put an experiment and you put Republicans, Democrats, whatever, independents in that environment? How would it change the way they think about things?
Goes back to gratitude, man. And it goes back to ultimately what you were talking about, which is just awareness. And I think it's so true. When you aren't aware, you can't make a choice. I think I mentioned this before. You have two tires that shoot this pebble across a lake, and the pebble never gets a chance. As soon as it's about to sink into the water, the next two tires shoot it across. That's kind of how our society works. And if we can just get people to stop, right? Just stop, they'll naturally sink into truth. They'll naturally sink into God. They'll naturally sink into their higher self. It's natural for us to do that. That means that is why when you look at the news, you see all this movement in the background. This is why commercials cut so quickly. This is why there's so much vibrant colors on the Disney Channel. This is why if you look at a movie that you thought was amazing in the 90s, it's slow compared to the speed of the movies now. It's this constant movement that what it does is it keeps us from sinking into our natural selves. And so the goal is, how do we get people to center? How do we get people to connect? They did some interesting research. They had people put on this augmented reality glasses, and what it would do is it would shoot an image back to them of their face, but older by about 30 or 40 years. They were younger people, and they had these older selves give advice to themselves. And what was so intriguing about it is that all the advice that their older version of themselves, now this is, mind you, them talking to themselves, but they look like an older version of themselves. They were saying, save money, spend time with your parents. All of a sudden, all of the things that we don't think about in our youth became clear when we saw ourselves as old. And because of that dichotomy, that separation between our old selves and our current selves, that's why we can't understand it. If we can create that connection and that flow, that old person will be me and see the world through eyes like this. When you realize that they're connected, then all of a sudden your choices become different, because you are aware that you may be robbing your future self to pay yourself now. And so being able to step back and to question, is this what I want? Do I need to chase, just like you said, the 8.5 glossy finish? Do I need to go and have this perfect job that robs me of my spirit, but gives me a certain paycheck? And at the same time, just like you said, mentally, maybe people who are on the spiritual journey, nirvana means the end of all desire. So if I'm trying to get to nirvana, that means I desire to have no desire, which means I cannot. I'm constantly chasing my tail. So in this same way, it's this, even if you're spiritually trying to get to this ascended place, as well as materialistically, it's if you're constantly trying to get where you're not present. And that's where the suffering lies.
Yeah, well said, man. And I think a lot of people struggle with that's that very notion about priorities, values, reality, what's important. A lot of pressures, and certainly the marketers and advertisers are ginning everybody up to make sure they're spending their hard-earned dollars, right?
Right, absolutely.
Wall Street's got to make their or every company needs to make their nut on Wall Street. They're a publicly traded company.
Yep.
And there's a lot of pressures, and people have to provide for their families. So it's a never-ending, perpetual cycle of buy, sell, consume, whatever. That's why garage sales before COVID was a big deal, right? It's kind of funny, right? You think about people put all this money into certain items, and then you go to a garage sale and you see those items that were worth 10 times as much, and they sell them for pennies on the barrel. It's just fascinating to look at that and the consumerism and what goes on. I'm not saying capitalism is bad. I think it's the best system on the planet to bring and lift people up out of poverty. But it's all about balance and priorities, because I think a lot of people end up in Western culture very, very disillusioned. So the third lesson of the way of Zen, which I thought was pretty cool, all relates to meditation and what is it. It's for a lot of people, it's kind of mystic. What does that mean? And maybe people have tried meditation recently, and I think when you think about meditation, to Zen believers, setting any goal when you're meditating is a bad idea. So the idea, I think the problem is, you say, okay, I'm going to go meditate now. And it's a kind of a goal. And when I meditate, I'm thinking about my goals, right? And I think the idea of taking your head and turning it off like a computer. Imagine your computer just shut it off and it's resting. That's really, that's like an art and practice unto itself. And I was reading that Buddhism and Taoism teach the opposite and use meditation as a means to empty the mind and purify it, right? So the idea that you're saying, hey, Berkey, you're saying, hey, we need a balance here in perspective. We don't want to be 56 years old and realize our ladder is against the wrong wall of what really mattered in life. You want to do that now at 20, 30, 40, right? So how do you cleanse your mind, purify it, and understand what really, really matters? I think meditation is one of those techniques that could be helpful.
Absolutely, man. I think meditation is, it's a gateway, right? It's a gateway to just presence. You can meditate at any moment. If I just paused and just looked at the wind going through my palm trees, if I just looked at that long enough with just attentive gratitude, you're in a meditative state, right? If you're just kind of breathing, you're centering. What meditation is it's letting go of the thinking. And it's not letting go of the thinking as in like pulling all the thoughts out of your mind. It's just when they come, they come. When they go, they go. And you're not writing the thought. You're not dwelling. I think that people think that it's like this mindless state. Yeah, but you're going to think. But you can't make a judgment on those thoughts, because when you make a thought and you make a judgment on thought, you double the thought. Double the thought, you create gravity. You're like, oh, dang, I thought about the thought and I judged it. Then you create more gravity. And so you're creating these mass piles of thought, of these illusions. They're just electrical impulses in your mind based on habit. But if you kind of just say you are what you are, then you start to center and you start to be in a place where it's easier to exist. And it's a muscle. Like when I meditate, there are periods where when I've done it enough for consistent amount of times, and any type of meditation is perfectly fine. But when I've done it, all of a sudden I notice that I can keep a thought off. I can keep in presence longer. And when I say longer, I'm talking about like 8 seconds, right? Eight
Right.
seconds is a long time. If you can do it for a minute, if you can do it for 5 minutes and you get to that space, it's incredible. But all it is it's the gym. You did your workout, right? Without the resistance training, it's almost the unresistance training. And then all of a sudden you go into the world, and then you are able, as I've noticed, you're able to be slower to react. You're in a responsive state,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden when somebody says something or doesn't do something or doesn't open the door for you or whatever, the thought just kind of goes, oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Boom. Because I don't have time to be reactionary. And so what the goal is ultimately is for you to realize that life is happening right now with or without your thoughts. And every time that you think or overthink it, you erase the visibility of the life happening in that moment.
Yeah.
And if you are able to showcase the visibility and see that which is happening in front of you, then you'll start to see that it's absolute miracles. Like, it's incredible. Like, if I could dissect even everything we see right now on this screen and be amazed. The fact that I can pull information through symbols and suck that into my brain and add to who I am as a person in books, like the idea of people who are dead, their thoughts have been transferred, and I can take that here. The fact that I can communicate with you through technology, the fact that, like, there's so many things that are just mind blowing, but I'm just concerned about, oh, it's street sweeping day, I got to make sure I don't get a ticket. Like, this is what happens when our mind just gets so intense.
We worry
And so
about
I
the
think
big
that,
issue, street sweeping. Take it out.
right, exactly, that's what happens. People are just worried about, oh, this person say this, oh, am I going to get that? And you're like so constantly set. And even if you're set not on things you're worried about, but things that you look forward to, you're like, I can't wait till I get that raise. And then there's misery until the raise happens, right? No, enjoy the ride.
And you miss
And
the
so
present.
meditation is that pause.
Yeah. Another way I saw that of thinking about what you just said, and I think it was kind of a powerful imagery, but another way of understanding meditation is to consider a muddy river. And throughout each day and each experience, your mental state becomes clouded, right? Just
Yes.
like a river with churning water. If muddy water is left to sit in peace, eventually the dirt sinks and the water becomes clear, right? We've seen this before. In other words, every time you meditate, you're letting your mind be still to give it a chance, let all the sediment sink to the bottom so you can see clearly. I think in today's world, it's so muddy, especially in today's world with 2020,
Right.
that it's hard. And I think, by the way, that's by design, but I think there's an opportunity to meditate to get clarity on what's really, really happening. And more importantly, what really, really matters.
Right. Yeah. There's, I love that analogy. I also, Headspace has this thing called the blue sky, and it really just hits. But what happens is when you're in a storm and you're in a plane and you hear the rain, you hear the lightning, and then you go into the clouds and you see the lightning and the flashes, and all of a sudden the sun and the blue sky is there. And what they say is that the blue sky is always there. It's just, are you willing to fly through it all to get to that blue sky? And just kind of thinking of that gives you a sense of peace. Like, even though it's cloudy right now, even though I can't see the sun, there is a blue sky. It's never like it goes away. It just gets covered. And so in the same way, for us to work to do that, and just like you said, with 2020, we do have options. We have options to be afraid. We have options to be angry. We have options to be caught up, or we have this incredible opportunity to say, I want to rise above the fray and see the sky. Why? Not because it's righteous and good, but because I deserve to feel good. And the people that are around me deserve to feel good. And the people who are sick with their emotions, I want to provide some type of light to them. That's where you gain power. That's where all of a sudden the game is not about what's right, what's wrong. It's about, I have a very limited amount of time to exist on this planet, and I want to spend as much of it feeling good and doing good.
No, that's right. I like that aviation analogy. We have a marine layer here in Orange County. Usually it sits about 2,000 feet, 2,500. And when you go on a certain day, it just looks gray and ominous and really kind of hopeless, right? And
Right.
just like life, you get in the plane and you just adjust your attitude right, which is pointing up. And you just give enough time and you go through the uncertainty of the clouds, you'll break out into brilliant sunshine. And it looks like you're surfing a sea of clouds. So the ocean is replaced by a white ocean. And yet you can still see
Right.
the sun and a blue sky, and it's amazing. And the perspective is otherworldly. And I think what we're talking about is really, really important. We got people that are rioting. We got people that are going after social justice, and there's some things that absolutely need to be worked on and fixed. There's no question about it. But yet there's some people getting involved because they're seeking what? They're seeking purpose in life. They're seeking value in life. And whatever they're experiencing today isn't enough in their existence. And I think in part is, if we think about the earth, we're on a spaceship. I know Elon Musk is creating a spaceship to get off the spaceship, but we're really on a spaceship flying through the universe at some rate. And what you're saying is to become mindful and be aware of the beauty in nature and the beauty of our existence and the sort of brevity of life, and getting the right perspective. But I think it's also juxtaposed by there is evil out there, and there are people that want to control other people. So it's not to put your head in the sand and be a kumbaya moment, but the opportunities to be sort of illuminating and big picture and expansive in your thinking, and really pump the brakes, slow down, let the settlement settle. Whatever you're thinking about in life matters, and really try to seek truth as it exists. Because flying out in space, I would say, if we knew, 20% more than we know today about the world and about the universe, let's just say aliens came here, right? I was listening to Joe Rogan. Maybe now would be the time if an alien species came and it was revealed. How would that change the dynamic of what we think about and what we think we know? Right? We're sort of locked in a paradigm. We're sort of locked in a way of thinking. And it's easy to get trapped in it because you double down on whatever position you have, especially with the group think. So if I'm with a group of, super smart people, I may aspire to be super smart. If I'm with a group of criminals, I'll probably aspire to be criminalistic, right? We soar with the eagles of our own kind. So I just think there's an opportunity with meditation, the way of Zen, because I think ultimately what people want is happiness. So some people could define it with control of others, control whatever. People define it certain ways, but if you can get and tap into your essence and get that sediment out of the way of your thinking, there may be an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, man. And I think that it is it's interesting because you said when you're flying, you say you change was it your altitude or attitude?
Attitude, man. You got to have the attitude up. Attitude predicts altitude, right? So if you have the right attitude, you'll get altitude on. If you have the wrong attitude, you'll get the wrong altitude in life.
That's exactly it, man. And so, what you focus on is what grows, right? What you look at, what you talk about is what becomes more. It must. It's natural. That's it. When you talk about a thing, there is no not. You can't negative a statement because it's already in your mind. If I say, don't think of a purple elephant, the don't doesn't give any power to remove that image. The image is there. And so whatever you speak of, against, or for, rushes to you. And so if you want to have an attitude and you want to lift into the altitude to where you can be in that sunshine space, you need to speak there. You need to focus there. Because if I'm telling you what I'm against, I'm pressing against it. I'm saying I'm against this microphone right here. I can't stand this microphone. All I'm saying is microphone. All I hear is don't think purple elephant. I'm thinking purple elephant. So I'm magnifying its essence. So what do I say? I don't say what I'm against. I say what I'm for. I push for what I'm for. I'm clear on that. I move the conversation up as quickly as possible. And then if they're like, well, we have to face this. Excellent. We'll face this. But I'll look at the disease only to find the solution, right? I won't look at the disease and understand the disease. I want to understand it enough to find the solution. I want to understand my pain enough to understand how I can utilize that pain for me to continue to grow. Right? Not to run away from the pain. I'm not trying to get to happiness, but what I'm trying to get to is a place where I can utilize it and functionally use it to make myself better, to make myself create, to make myself more, or to reveal within myself more. So it's this constant idea of look up, because when you keep that upness, you bring it, you create it. But when you're looking down, you can't be in a meditative state. What you're in is a dwelling state, which is another form of, it's marination. You're in a marinating state, right? Which is more dangerous. When you're in a meditative state, you're unmarinating, you're letting go of everything, and you're not allowing it to seep into your system.
Yeah, I was thinking about tie-dyed shirts. You have a white T-shirt, you put it in tie-dye, and what happens? It gets multiple colors, and that could be similar to whatever you let your mind marinate on, good or evil. Your mind's going to be colored by that good or evil. And if you don't have wisdom and insight, and you haven't spent time meditating, really understanding what is truth, and you're 17, 18, 19, 20 with the big ego, because we've all been there, and you think you know better, and you're seeing the ramifications on the streets of America. And it's really unfortunate because all these people have tremendous value and tremendous potential, but they've sort of plugged that cord into a stream of conscious stream of thought that could either be defined as evil or good. Now, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. We've heard that, and
Right.
there's some truth to
Absolutely.
that. But I think for everybody, the opportunity is to somehow plug into wisdom, insight, not impulse, not lust
Right.
of what this world could offer, but to
Right.
really become, ennobled by those that have come before us. Look at people who have done great things. What were the recipes for success? By the way, when I learned to fly a plane, I wasn't trying to discover how to fly a plane. I
Mm.
followed the people that discovered how to fly a plane, and I followed the recipes.
Right. 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 That's
Fly right, right?
right.
Otherwise,
Right.
and I think you see this repeated in America. This big push towards, Marxism, socialism, communism, or whatever. You have to look at what works and what doesn't ultimately, and then come together to figure out how we can solve the problems to hear everybody's. Remember, we went back what I said about the car dealership. What was the one mistake he made? He didn't listen actively to what we wanted. He tried to game it. And it was funny. He goes, well, this particular car won't be available for 2 months. And there's a thing in
Right.
negotiating called BATNA, best alternative to negotiated solution. That was our
Right.
walkaway. It's like, okay, well, we'll talk to you in 2 months. Not more than 5 minutes later, we get a call that says, oh, just by the way, we have the same color on the lot with the features you wanted. You want to come back? No. Right?
Right.
So again, the tactics you take, how you approach people, listening to the customer becomes really important. We could have had a dialogue, right? And then if you wanted to sell a certain car versus this other one, we could talk about it. But I think there's got to be respect. There's got to be integrity. And you've got to listen to both sides, especially in America today, about what the pressure points are, what the pain is, because it does matter.
Exactly.
And then we can talk about what's the best solution. I mean, blowing it all up, well, that's one way to do it. But I think meditation would be good for everybody in America today.
Man, it's the most important thing right now, because the thing is the ability to let go of the story, because everybody is just holding on to, don't take this from me or give this to me.
Wow.
And so what happens is you're in this place of just total fear, which is the goal, but you're in this place of total fear. And so what happens is we're like, okay, if you stop being you, then things will be okay. That's like the mindset of what everybody says. Everybody's putting the issue on the outside, but they're not taking it to the inside, just like you said, to that space of listening. And what we need to let go is of the titles. What are the titles of these things? If I say, whatever, even if it's like a conservative or liberal or Democrat or like all these names they're imbued with so much energy right now. They're imbued with too much energy that people don't know how to communicate, because it's this massive, it's a shadow of what the things really are. And so people don't know how to communicate. And so it's getting to a place to, when you're in a meditative state, you let go of all that groupthink. You let go of all this and you say, okay, let me try to see what the pain points are. As you mentioned, when you're looking at an iceberg, you're seeing this behavior up here and you're like, oh my God, these behaviors. But what's happening are unmet needs exist on the underneath. And so it takes people in meditative spaces to be able to say, okay, even though I'm seeing this on the outside and they're seeing me do this on the outside, am I willing to dive in to understand their pain, right? All across the world. Now, how in the hell is that going to happen if we can't do that with ourselves?
Right. Exactly.
If I'm not willing to dive into myself, and I say, screw everyone else right now, because as soon as I think that I can help that, or they need to do this to stop that, I have to go in me. And when I go into me and do the work to find, what are my pain points? What is making me react this way? What is making me so frustrated about what I see on my television? What is it that moves me this much to be in this space? What is that? And then when we do that internal work, then we'll start to see, oh my God, the thing I see in the world, the dichotomies of these two ideas, these three ideas, they're happening in me. This dichotomy within myself where I'm chasing materialism, but my soul isn't fulfilled. I am right now having that battle in myself, and therefore it reflects in the world around me and all my energies. But if I can clear, if I can ameliorate, if I can listen, if I can pay attention, if I can have the hard conversations and disagree with the capitalism and socialism in my chest, if I can come to that place of peace, then maybe I can have a conversation out here. But until then, it's best I shut up. Like that's the space.
Boy, that's well said. Words of wisdom. And when I think about why meditation is so critical, the thing I love about flying is because you got to be comfortable with critique. You really have to be comfortable with criticism, because it saves your life and it gets you really clear on your skill sets as a pilot and where you need to work on things. and really,
Absolutely.
really where you're short on things. And I think we live in a world where it's symbolism over substance. Again, the 8.5 by 10 glossy TikTok, right? It's, oh, I look a certain way and I'm going to project a certain image, but there's no internal
Mhm.
work being done. There's no real honest assessment internally of who you are. So people walk around with an identity crisis, like, who am I?
Right.
Well, guess what? I get
Right.
sucked into a group think, an identity formed of a
Mhm.
group that may or may not
Right.
represent my true self, my true ethos, because I don't know what it
Yep.
is. And that's why I
Absolutely.
think meditation starts, like you said, with the individual taking self-assessing, honest stock of who you are, what you
Right.
believe, and what your
Right.
purpose here in life is. And the reality is, most people don't know, and they get sucked into a whatever, a vortex. Right? It's
Mhm.
like jumping
Mhm.
in a river. You can go one of two ways, and there you
Right.
go. And all of a sudden, you wake up one day and you say, "How did I get here? And why do I think
Right.
the way I think?" And then you're in your 30s and 40s with the midlife crisis, saying,
Right.
"What is it I believe in?" It's predictable to me. It's, as I look at my life right now, it's all very predictable, but there's huge opportunities, again, to pump the brakes to what you're saying, and
Right.
really meditate, which is a really simple way of saying, get to know yourself. Who are you, and why do you
Right.
believe what you believe? Because with more information, would you change what you believe? Would you be willing to die with what you're willing to die for today with some more information? Or would the more information
Right.
change how you see the world?
Yeah, man. So true.
Deep stuff.
So true. Absolutely.
The way of Zen, Burke. The way of Zen.
Yep. That was great, man. I always appreciate these times, man. Absolutely.
All right, man. Great conversation. Until next time.